If you are looking for realistic gameplay on EAFC 24, then look no further. I'm about to break down all the settings and sliders that I use to make the gameplay as realistic as possible. So let's get into it. So just a couple of things to note before we start going over the settings. The first is that the purpose of these settings and sliders is to make the game as realistic as possible. It's not to make the game more difficult necessarily. It's not even necessarily to make the game more fun. It's to try and replicate what we see weekend after weekend in real life football and try and replicate that as accurately in the game as possible. The second thing to note is that these are the settings and sliders that I use for my Redmont Rangers Road to Glory career mode. There's a playlist of the series on my channel if you want to check that out, and there you'll be able to see exactly how these settings and sliders play in the game. So without further ado, let's get into, first of all, the gameplay settings. So one of the biggest ways that you can make your game more realistic is by using full manual assists. What that means is, if you take a look at passing would be the best example to show. If you take a look at 3 pass assistance, there are 3 basic options on most of these assist settings: manual, semi-manual, and assisted or semi-assisted. You can think of it either way. Assisted basically means that the computer is giving you lots and lots of help in terms of where the ball ends up. It's obviously up to you to direct where you want the ball to go with the left stick, but if you don't point it exactly towards the player that you intend to receive the ball, the computer's going to give you a lot of help, a lot of assistance in getting the ball there. So it's going to help you with both direction and with power. On semi-assist, as you'd expect, it's going to give you some help. So you have to be a bit more precise with where you're pointing the left stick. You have to be a bit more precise with the power. It relies more so on your aim, as you can see that it says there, and pass power will be the thing that's primarily assisted on semi-assist. On manual, it's completely up to you. You're completely on your own. The ball is going to go exactly where you point your left stick, and it's going to go exactly as far as you power it up in terms of how long you hold the button down. So this is the biggest difference that you can make to make your game more realistic, is turning all of these assists to manual. So that applies for shot assistance here, which is on manual. The direction you aim is the direction the shot travels. That applies to through pass, to lobbed pass, to ground pass, to lob pass, lobbed through pass that was, and then lob pass assistance as well. All of these you want to turn to manual. The only exception to that is you want cross assistance, I would say, on semi. Again, you've got those 3 options: assisted, semi-assisted, and manual. And by all means, you can use cross assistance on manual as well if you want to. However, the thing with the crossing is that because you are generally, when you're crossing the ball, traveling directly down the flank, you'll be pushing your left stick either fully towards the right or fully towards the left, depending on which way you're currently kicking within the game. To then cross the ball, you basically want it at least at a right angle across the penalty area. Most often though, or fairly often, you're going to want to cross the ball backwards, so even more than a right angle, back across the penalty area. So just in terms of the way that you have to maneuver the left stick from going completely in one direction to control your winger in terms of the direction that they're moving, and then kind of back almost, sometimes even a complete 180 in the opposite direction for where you want the cross to go, it can result in some less than ideal kind of results, and it's very difficult to get the cross exactly where you want it using manual crossing. If you want that extra challenge, by all means use manual, but as I said, the main purpose of my settings and sliders is to get the game playing as realistic as possible, and I think you get the most realistic results using semi-assisted crossing. The remainder of the gameplay settings are fairly straightforward. Auto shots I turn off, assisted headers I turn off, timed finishing I leave on, auto flare pass I leave on, but again, you can absolutely turn that off. That one is down to personal preference. I leave it on just because I don't want to be thinking about holding in the left trigger when there is a flare pass that would be good to use in that particular context. You do occasionally get flare passes out of context where you wouldn't really see them in real life, but it's fairly rare, I would say. Pass receiver lock I have to late. Pass precision, or precision pass rather, sensitivity I just leave on normal. I don't use precision passes a great deal. Again, that's going to be down to personal preference. If you use them fairly often, then you're going to want to, change that however you see fit, essentially. If we move down to defending, I do like to use advanced defending. So this is the new defending system to EAFC 24. And that gives us the option to press A to attempt a shoulder challenge or a seal out. The other options there are tactical and legacy, which have been available before. On FIFA 23, I would use legacy. But I think advanced defending is certainly the way to go in this particular game. Auto clearances I do have on, just because there are some instances where you don't necessarily have the chance to react. And again, that's going to result in some unrealistic scenarios where a player in real life clearly would clear the ball, but just because you haven't had the chance to react to a deflection or something like that. So auto clearance is on. Clearance assist, though, you do want unidirectional, so the ball is cleared in the direction that you input. Jockey I have on assisted, and then pass block assistance I have as on. The rest probably going to be pretty much the same for everybody. Auto switching on air balls and loose balls, I'm pretty sure that's default with the game out of the box as it comes. No auto switching move assist. Right switching I have as adaptive, so the longer you hold the right stick in the direction of a player, the further away the CPU will switch you. Player relative as the switching preference. Sensitivity on 4. Classic. Player lock on. Icon switching on. Contextual dribbling I do have on, as well as orbit dribbling. And then goalkeeper stuff I don't tend to touch. I do have analog sprint on. So again, the more you hold in right trigger, the faster the player is going to run. So fairly straightforward in terms of the gameplay settings. But as I said, it's going to be those manual assists that's going to be the biggest difference to achieving more realistic gameplay. So the match settings is something else you're going to want to look at if you are looking to achieve some realistic gameplay here on EAFC 24. The biggest thing you can do within the match settings is change the half length and the difficulty level. So half length, obviously there are a range of different options. You do see a lot of people playing with, I'd say 4-minute halves is probably the default that most people use, particularly in the kind of content that you see on YouTube. I would say 10 minutes is the sweet spot. I would love a scenario where you could go up to 15. I think the games just drag out a little too long there. There's a few too many goals as well if you bump it up to 15 minutes. But I think 10 minutes is a sweet spot where you can feel that the game is long enough that you can really get stuck into it and you can see your game plan played out as you would like, but also quick enough that you can get a good amount of games in a session. And again, statistics, goals, that kind of thing end up in a realistic place as well. Difficulty level, I always have on legendary at the very most. You can definitely take it down to world class if you need to. I definitely wouldn't go up to ultimate, I was going to say, though. Ultimate, not an option on FC 24. I wasn't aware of that. I thought ultimate was still in the game, but apparently not. Regardless, even if it was in the game, I would advise don't have it on. So ultimate used to be every player on the opposition team is a 99 overall. And obviously, if you're going for difficulty, that's going to be great. But if you're going for realism, not so much. Every player is not a 99 overall. So having the game on legendary or on world class, you really see the difference between players. The best players stand out from the worst players and things like that. I do, though, have competitor mode off, player-based difficulty off as well. Game speed is going to be another big one. So slow-paced tends to be the ideal, and it was the ideal in FIFA 23. However, in FC 24, having the game on slow-paced can cause some issues. So it can cause defenders to act erratically and very unrealistically. They will take bad angles towards the ball. They will kind of jog back to their position where they should be sprinting, and that leaves gaps in behind that you can easily exploit. So default is the game speed that you want for this year. However, we will see in the sliders in just a moment that we can slow the game down even on default. game speed. Default ball, quick substitutes, everything else, not too much to write home about there. But that's what you want for the match settings. Just to return to the gameplay settings for just a moment, the 10-minute halves, obviously you don't want to create, if you're playing with 10-minute halves and just everything else is default, you're going to create far too many opportunities and you're going to score far too many goals. So using 10-minute halves is definitely something you want to do if you have everything here set to manual. So passing is so much more difficult, shooting is so much more difficult, crossing so much more difficult with these manual assists, that you're really going to have to work hard to create opportunities in these 10-minute halves. So if you can't get on with the manual assists, don't go up to 10-minute halves, because you're going to be playing ping pong passing. Everything that you create is, or every pass that you play is going to go straight to one of your own players. It's going to be very rare that you lose the ball. You lose the ball often with these manual assists. So 10-minute halves is plenty for that. Not too much to mention about the camera settings, since this primarily is personal preference. You can play pretty much on whatever camera is comfortable for you, but I do like to play on the EA Sports Game Cam. Again, I'm looking for realism. This is the most realistic replication of what you would probably see on a television broadcast. Everything else, I don't really adjust. I don't really play any other game mode other than offline career mode. But of course, you can adjust the camera settings as you see fit. I might play around with this a little bit and see if I can get an even more realistic camera angle. But I do like the game cam for the camera settings. Again, not too much to mention here in terms of the injury settings, but we can go over them briefly since we are here. So injuries obviously on, offsides obviously on, bookings obviously on, handball and referee strictness are going to be the only two probably that you would like to change. So handballs you can just have on. Whether or not you'd like handballs to be called in the box is basically the option here, or on only for goalkeepers. So if the goalkeeper comes out of the box, then it will be a handball. In no other scenarios would it be handball. You can play with them completely off as well. I think the most realistic is on, except for penalties. You do so rarely see handballs, penalties given for handballs these days. And I think when you have that on, there's a handball given as a penalty once or twice every single game, which obviously isn't realistic. So I think handballs on, except for penalties, is the best outcome. You do sometimes get unrealistic free kicks for handballs. If the ball just bobbles up from a thigh onto a hand, or somebody tries to play a long pass and it's blocked by a hand in very close proximity, something like that, that you don't really see free kicks given for in real life. But getting as many free kicks just in general as possible in the game is something that has been an issue in the past, and it is something that helps get a few more fouls and a few more free kicks, which does make it a bit more realistic. Referee strictness, I started out with very strict because it was, again, so difficult to get fouls in previous editions of the game, and then to get bookings and red cards. This was a little bit too strict though. EA kind of overdone it a little bit with the referee strictness on very strict, so I did pull it back just to strict. I don't believe that this actually impacts the number of fouls that are given per game. I believe that will remain the same, and the referee strictness only adjusts how likely a player is to get a yellow or a red card for the fouls that they give. So that's what the referee strictness adjusts, and strict, you still do get plenty of yellow cards. The odd red card, I felt like on very strict, again, you were getting about one red card per game, which again is unrealistic. You don't get that anywhere near that often in real life. So strict is where I left it in terms of referee strictness. And those are the rule settings. Let's move on to the sliders. So this is part of the video that you've probably been waiting for, the sliders. So again, just to reiterate, the purpose of these sliders is to get the most realistic gameplay possible. It's not to make it more difficult, although obviously difficulty is a balance that you do look to strike between, realism and difficulty, and the perfect slider set is going to be ones that are challenging and that result in realistic gameplay. I feel like that's where we've got these at the moment. So let's run through, first of all, what the user is going to be looking at in terms of sliders. So I said earlier, one of the biggest differences that you can make to make the game more realistic is to change all of the assists to manual. The second thing is to slow the game right down. That was why on the match settings, ideally we want the game speed to be on slow paced, because again, just out of the box, the game is very, very high paced. The ball absolutely ping pongs all over the pitch. It is like watching a game of pinball at times. The ball moves so quickly, players move so quickly, and you want to slow it right down to get it more realistic. So that's why slow paced is ideal. However, for the reasons mentioned earlier, we need it on default. What we can do on default though is just bring the sprint speed down. So sprint speed has been dropped all the way down to 5 for the user. Acceleration can stay at 50. I do like to bring acceleration down just a touch to 49 or even 48. So you can do that if you wish. However, again, that does sometimes result in those issues I mentioned earlier with the slow pace setting. Players just jogging back to their positions rather than sprinting, taking bad angles to the ball, kind of jockeying in position where they should be running. And again, holes going to open up that shouldn't really be there and that wouldn't be there in real life. So the players move just ever so slightly too quickly for my liking with acceleration at 50. And they do move more realistically on a player-to-player basis in terms of individual movements on 49 or 48. But we just have to accept it on 50 just to stop those issues from taking place. Shot error and pass error are going to be important to mention here as well, because we are using all of the manual assists. So every time we pass the ball, we're doing that completely based on our left stick and A input. When we shoot, we're doing that entirely on our left stick and our B input. So we want our shot and our pass error to be fairly low. If we're playing with all those assists on, I would be bumping those way up. I would have these at 75 to 90, something like that in terms of errors. Shot error probably at 75, pass error more up towards 90. However, because the game is so reliant on my input for pass error, I do want the ball more often than not to go exactly where I'm passing, because I'm going to make mistakes in terms of the direction that I input with the left stick. I'm going to make enough mistakes that I don't need the game to implement pass error for me. I'm going to be implementing the error myself by not quite pointing exactly where I need to point. However, obviously players don't always put the ball exactly where it needs to go. They might be aiming exactly where they want to aim, but it comes off their foot slightly wrong, and it doesn't end up going where they wanted it to go. So we do still need some pass error. It's not all the way down on 0, but it is all the way down on 25. Shot error can just stay at 50. That's fine as it is. Shot speed has been bumped up to 51 and pass speed has been bumped down to 36. So again, combined with the sprint speed, this is going to be something that really slows the game down. As I said earlier, those ping pong passes you see, the ball just bouncing around from player to player, foot to foot to foot within, fractions of a second, as you see with the game just out of the box. This is going to be greatly reduced with pass speed down at 36. Injuries almost never occur just on default. Watch a football game and you will see 5, 6, 7, 8 players go down with injuries, probably even more than that, up towards double digits per game. Players go down, they roll around on the floor, they get kicked in the shin, they get their foot stood on, they get elbowed in the head whilst they're going up for a header. It almost never results in them leaving the pitch, so that's exactly what we want to replicate here. We want players getting injured often, but we don't want those injuries lingering too often. So players will get injured a lot with injury frequency up at 90. There'll be, probably 2 or 3 at least players per game who get injured. And the commentators mention it. They say he's just been trodden on in that last challenge. Is something you hear very often. But with the injury severity down at 25, normally they just run the injury off and they're perfectly fine to continue. However, even with the injury all the way down at 25, you still do see lasting injuries, and a good range of lasting injuries as well. 5 days, 7 days, a week, 2 weeks. In my most recent episode of the Redmont Rangers Road to Glory career mode that I've just recorded, I've just had 2 players in the same game who are now out for 3 months, even with the injury severity down at 25. So this is something that I've worked on quite a lot, and I've struck a good balance there, I think, with 90 and 25. Goalkeeper ability needs to be bumped up. The goalkeepers out of the box are not good enough. This does tie in also with the shot speed, though. So these 2 sliders should be used in tandem with one another. If you bump the goalkeeper ability up, but you keep the shot speed down or even lower it, it can result in some kind of wonky animations that don't look too realistic. Because the goalkeeper, because the ability is so high, they're predicting the shot fairly early, so they start to dive, but the shot speed is slower, so the ball doesn't reach them as quickly as, you know, the goalkeeper was anticipating that it would. So that can result in some wonky animations, so use those in tandem. But again, I think I've struck a good balance there. Marking is just on 50, so again, that's left at default. Run frequency is at 20, and then we've got the height, the length, and the width sliders here. So these are important because they dictate, firstly, how high up the pitch teams will position themselves, basically. How wide they will be allowed to drift, and then the disparity between the two sets of players, basically, where each of the two teams set up, the disparity, the distance between those two, essentially. So again, 62, 32, 52 is what you want to set for that, and those are in a good position. They do still allow the tactical vision, the custom game plans, and that kind of thing to take effect. So if you want to press high up the pitch, you can still set that in your custom tactics, and that will still apply even with the adjusted values here. Fullback positioning is kind of down to personal preference. I have dragged that back a little bit just because on 50, the fullbacks do drift forward a little bit too much, and they kind of set up in a default position kind of almost on top of the wingers, essentially, or on top of the left and right midfielders. So I've dragged that back just a little bit just to hold the fullbacks back a little bit. But again, in custom tactics, if you want to set them to overlap and join the attack, they will then make those runs outside, but just as they are holding their shape, they'll set up a little deeper. Power bar is something that only applies to the user, and this applies to the inputs for the assists. So when we are passing, not only do we need to point the left stick in the direction we want the ball to go, but we need to power the pass up with A as well. So that's what the power bar is for. So the higher you set the power bar slider, the quicker the bar will fill up. So you want that to be higher than 50, just because you don't want to be lingering on the ball for too long, powering up a pass when somebody is coming to press you. You need to get the ball in and out of your feet fairly quickly. So that's certainly personal preference. 62 is where I like it. You might have it a little higher, a little lower, but probably in that 60 to 65 range is probably where you're going to find that you would like to have it. And then first touch control error is just 50 for the user. No need to adjust that one. Again, there's going to be errors that you make just based on the manual inputs. So just default out of the box is absolutely fine there. So let's get into the CPU sliders as well. So you're going to see a lot of similarities between the user and the CPU sliders. However, there are going to be some important differences. We do, first of all, see that sprint speed and acceleration are the same for the user and the CPU. If you do find that the game is a little bit too easy or a little bit too difficult, a disparity between these sliders is an easy way to adjust that. If you want to make the game more difficult, give the CPU a little bit more sprint speed and a little bit more acceleration. They'll move to the ball quicker. They'll have a bit of an advantage in that way. You won't be able to beat them one-on-one quite as easily. That'll make the game a little bit more difficult. So if it is just a little bit too easy or a little bit too hard, that is something you can do. Just from a realism perspective, though, I do like the sprint speed and acceleration to be the same where possible, just because then that really allows the ratings of the individual players to be maximized, essentially. If the CPU has got higher sprint speed and higher acceleration, their slower players are going to be able to keep up with your quicker players. We do have some much higher shot and pass errors, though. So both all the way up to 80 for the CPU. And that is because they obviously don't have the same restrictions that we have in terms of the manual assist. Just by the nature of the computer playing itself, it's going to be assisting itself, obviously. So the CPU does need those errors implemented on it so that every pass and every shot doesn't go exactly where it needs to go. So 80-80 are the inputs there. Shot error, I am tempted to take down ever so slightly, maybe to 78, just because in recent games that I've played, I have seen players missing chances that they probably should at least be getting on target. So that's something to bear in mind if you do input these sliders. Just keep an eye on that shot error and how frequently the CPU opponents miss kind of easy chances in game, or how often they don't hit the target. Shot speed is the same, pass speed is the same, injury frequency and severity is also the same, goalkeeper ability is the same with marking, run frequency, line height, line length, line width. All of this is exactly the same. Fullback positioning is just default for the CPU though. On the user sliders, we dropped that down to 25. The CPU team doesn't seem to have the same issue though with their fullback setting up a little too high up the pitch. If you do notice that, you can always drop that. Doesn't make too much of a difference to the sliders, but I find default is just fine. And then the final slider for the CPU is first touch control error. So that will be, you know, when the CPU players receive the ball, how easily can they control it? And that error is all the way up at 100. So that's the only slider here that is completely maxed out. Even with 100 first touch control error, the CPU, they don't have an issue controlling the ball when it's passed to them. So it seems like an extreme slider value, but it's absolutely fine as it is. You would imagine on 100 that balls are going to be pinging here, there and everywhere whenever the CPU passes to one of their teammates, but certainly not the case. So 100 is a good value there, even though it does seem extreme. So those are the settings and the sliders in total. Let me know if you do implement these sliders and how they go for you. Let me know of any changes that you might make as well. There's a couple of things, like I said, with the shot error here that I have noticed. The goalkeeper ability maybe slightly as well. Might be things that I tweak as I go forward. So if I make any significant changes, I'll always post a settings and the sliders update in the future. But as I said earlier, check out the Redmont Rangers Road to Glory career mode and see these sliders in action. I think you'll be surprised how much of a difference they do make. It is very difficult to get used to the manual assists initially. If you really do struggle, what you can do is set all of these to assisted, and then you can go back to the user sliders and you can bump the shot and the pass error up like this. So I'll probably put shot error at about 75, pass error all the way up at about 90, something like that. So if you really can't get on with the manual assists, it is very, very difficult at first. It does take a lot of getting used to. Then you can always implement the errors that way. And again, that should result in some much more realistic gameplay. But do persist with the manual assists. It does result in some really, really rewarding gameplay. And when you do manage to create an opportunity, it is really, really rewarding, and it feels very, very good to score goals in that way. You can create some opportunities that you just couldn't create any other way as well. So you can create some really realistic passing moves that just aren't there with the assists. So those are the settings and the sliders that I use to get the most realistic gameplay possible. Hope you get some good use out of them as well. And as I said, make sure you check out that Redmont Rangers Road to Glory career mode over on the channel. And until next time, take it easy.